Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are welcoming Melissa Toufanian to our airwaves today. Melissa is the managing director at Navigator Research. That's a public opinion research project. They track how Americans view or feel about some of the big issues of the day. Melissa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I want to talk about exactly how people do feel about the issues of the day. You know, Donald Trump says affordability is a Democratic hoax, but I don't know. People sure seem to be concerned about grocery prices and gas prices. What have you found on that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I can tell you what's not a hoax is that 2/3 of Americans do not have a favorable opinion of how Trump is handling the economy and the job overall of presidency. They tell us in survey after survey that they are struggling to pay for gas, for groceries. We've heard anecdotes from people across the country. In order for them to get by, they're putting groceries on buy now, pay later, things like Klarna or other things, just to be able to bring food home to their families. I think a lot of families across the country are struggling even more after the so-called one big beautiful bill cut SNAP and Medicaid funding and forcing people to increase their costs for just putting food on the table or for healthcare. So the reality is affordability is not a hoax. It's something that Americans are really struggling with.
And from what I've read, as much as possible, Congress tried to delay the implementation of some of the cuts that they want just so they could get through the midterms. But I think that that's not working. I mean, people see, Medicare subsidies are going to be cut. Medicaid is cut, which means rural hospitals will close. I mean, if I've got a broken bone, I don't really want to drive an hour and a half to an emergency room to get it fixed. I mean, it's just staggering, the kitchen table issues, the things that affect people's everyday lives don't seem to be a priority.
I agree. It is so interesting. So one of my favorite questions that we ask every 3 weeks is, what are Americans' top priorities? What do you want your elected representatives in Congress to work on? And we hear in every single survey, top of the list, cost of living and inflation, jobs in the economy, healthcare, Medicare, Social Security. Those are their top priorities. Then we ask, what do you think Trump and Republicans are focused on? What we hear is immigration, foreign conflicts, election integrity. So we have a total mismatch of priorities of what the American people want their elected leaders to focus on and what they're getting from those in power in the Republican Party and from Trump. And then when we do our focus groups, we do focus groups each month, which is, I think, a great way for us here in DC to hear from people across the country. We hear so many stories of how people are cutting corners. Some people told us with these new SNAP cuts that they, as parents, are going without meals, that they're cutting the amount of food that they're eating to ensure that, their teenagers, their kids can get enough to eat. So this is really impacting people's day-to-day lives, and they really desperately want some relief.
You mentioned the Iran war. What kind of surveys or polling have you done about how people feel about the Iran war? And have you done it more than once?
We've done quite a few. So we started asking people about this even before the war broke out. We're now in about month 6 of the war. So we've been tracking this every single month to better understand how do people feel about it. And so our most basic question is just approval overall. We have seen that grow to a majority of Americans disapproving overall of the war. That disapproval increases up to 60% when people are aware of how much the war war is costing them, once people understand that we're spending billions of dollars, and the low end estimate from Department of Defense is 40 billion. It's far surpassed that by now. But when people hear that we're spending billions of their dollars on a war that they don't support, on yet another war in the Middle East, a forever war that people did not want to get in, they are extremely displeased. Then we ask them, what do you want the focus on? They want that money spent back home. They want to improve our schools. They want to support these popular programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP. They want that attention at home. They don't understand why the war was launched in the first place. I mean, if you look at where we're at now, right? We have the Trump administration still negotiating to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before the war broke out. So now we have to focus on reopening this critical waterway where our food supplies, where our gas, our diesel is passing through. That's why we see those high prices. So we have to first, we as Americans, I need our government to first reopen a strait that was open previously before they can even start negotiating on their stated intent of so-called, regime change in Iran or a nuclear war program in Iran. So they've created a problem that we didn't even have in the first place. And that problem has further raised costs for people across the country who are already struggling.
I can see, especially with all of the hardship, where people would have a very jaundiced view of the Iran war at this point. What did you do any surveys when it was brand new? Did people support it then? Oh, yeah, we need regime change.
I don't think when we asked about their support, I think it's more along partisan lines. So what we've actually seen is that, not surprising that those who identify with the Republican Party, especially MAGA Republicans, are supportive of the war. And they'll say that, when you ask the basis question, they're more supportive. What we're seeing are cracks coming from people who are nonpartisan, who identify as independents. Strongly Democrats are against the war. Again, not surprising. But what we've actually seen increase that I think is really interesting is that we ask people who voted for Trump in 2024 if they regret their vote. We have seen an uptick in the number of people who say they regret their vote for Trump in 2024. In our most recent survey, we hit the highest number. We now see 1 in 4 people, almost 25% of people who voted for Trump in 2024 say they regret their vote. And when we ask,
no, really?
So we've seen that go up. We've seen that go up since the war broke out, actually, gradually increasing each survey wave, each time we ask the question. And then we ask them after that, our immediate question after that is, for those who do regret their vote, why? And what we see as the most popular, most stated answer is that people cite to the war with Iran. They cite to the economy, and they cite to broken promises. A lot of people who voted for Trump just wanted their prices to go down. Remember, it feels like a lifetime ago, but on the campaign trail, Trump was telling us he's going to lower prices on day one. So they're struggling. They, took a gamble and said, maybe I want change. I don't, unsatisfied with prices as they are. They've only seen their prices increase, and the prices that they don't have a lot of control over. You have to fill up your car to drive your family around. You have to fill up your car to get to work. That's not an easy cost to cut. So they're struggling even more now under the Trump administration, and they don't feel like their elected representatives are doing anything to help them. And then at the same time, what we're seeing in Congress and in DC is that we actually have Republicans in Congress and the Trump administration advocating for more money, more of our federal budget to be allocated for the war, whether that's restocking the munitions piles that are low, or just in general additional support for the Department of Defense for the war. And we see that as extremely unpopular across partisan lines. People, again, they don't want to see that money go to a forever war that they didn't want in the first place. They want to see that money spent back at home on the issues that they care about most, like lowering cost of living, healthcare, improving jobs in the economy.
Melissa, I didn't say this about you when we started this segment, but those of you who are listening should know Melissa was a former State Department Deputy Assistant Secretary. Melissa was on the communications team for the original Iran nuclear deal that was put together under Obama. It's been a while since that happened. Can you still remember, can you tick off the big points of what that deal accomplished?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I'm very proud of it. The team that negotiated that Iran deal, I think most importantly, did so with our allies and partners. So it wasn't just the U.S. at the negotiating table. We had our partners, including European countries. We even had China and Russia alongside negotiating that deal. And so what it did is prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon with unprecedented level of our ability to monitor and evaluate the nuclear program so that Iran could develop nuclear power for peaceful energy purposes and to not enrich uranium to the point where it could be used for a nuclear weapon. So we had unprecedented verification and monitoring through the UN. So we were able to reach a deal that Iran agreed to, we, the US, agreed to, Russia and China, the UK and France, we all agreed to. So by being able to monitor Iran's nuclear program and ensure that they weren't enriching uranium at those levels that would be required to create a nuclear weapon, we were able to be sure that Iran would not obtain a nuclear weapon, which is the Trump administration's stated rationale for launching this war in the first place, was to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and by doing so, they think we needed regime change. So actually, the thing that I'm most proud of, having supported the team, the negotiators, is that they were able to reach an agreement to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon without a single person being killed. That we did not have to launch a war in order to reach a diplomatic agreement that put Iran's nuclear program in a box. And now we've seen almost 20 US service members killed, hundreds injured, to try and achieve the same outcome that we had previously with the Iran deal that Trump decided to rip up and do away with.
Donald Trump has many qualities that I don't appreciate, but I can't understand what appears to be a near obsession with Barack Obama. Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize, and Trump, I think part of the way that he was convinced to drop these bombs in Iran, you drop the bombs, you take out the leadership, all those thousands of people who were protesting, they're going to rise up, they're going to take over the government, and you are going to have brought democracy and peace to Iran. Like, dude, if you're ever going to get the Nobel Prize, man, that's the way to do it. I mean, and so I think that he was snookered, but he also seems to hate anything that Barack Obama created, produced, touched, talked about, thought about. It's just it's an obsession.
Crazy. So crazy. And I mean, and it's like, who's paying the price for the delusions of grandeur and the obsession that you're describing? It's the American people that are paying the price. I mean, I'm sure your listeners have seen, I can't get the image of the families at Dover Air Force Base where the service members who were killed, where their families come back and see them in caskets. I mean, there are real consequences for launching the war. There are real consequences. Those families will never be the same of suffering that loss. I mean, think about the families who are struggling to get by for what? I mean, if we think about what's the outcome that they have had so far in Iran? You get rid of the Ayatollah, the leader of Iran. You just have his son in place, same last name, even more of a hardline leader who was even more intent on securing a nuclear weapon. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Let's get rid of the guy who was open to signing a deal and replace him with his son, who is more radical. There's a step up.
Exactly. And throughout, I mean, you brought this up too. I mean, if we look back to the very beginning, we saw thousands of people who were peacefully protesting in the streets in Iran killed by the regime. And so supposedly part of the rationale was to go in and support them. There's a story in the New York Times today that they have not received an ounce of support. If anything, they are also being forced to suffer. So the Iranian people have not received any sort of relief that was promised to them by Trump. Remember Trump, 6 months ago, telling them, hold on, help is coming. If anything, more than 24 of the protesters have actually been killed by the regime. They have been assassinated by the regime for their role in the protests. So there are no winners here. This is not a benefit to the American people. It's not a benefit to the Iranian people. There have been implications across the Middle East and in countries where we have military bases that we rely on, where our service members are. This is, I think the Trump administration is realizing diplomacy is pretty hard. You can't just expect, especially Iran, to capitulate and give you everything you want. And you're now negotiating to reopen a strait that was already open. So, I mean, there are just so many layers to this, and none of it has been a success.
We do need to get to a break, but there's one more question I want to ask you about this. I'm talking to Melissa Toufanian, and we will be right back with my question if I can remember it.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter. Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I want to talk to you more about what is going on in Iran. Do you think we are at a point? Donald Trump seems to just want to look the other way. It doesn't matter what happens. He just wants it to be done and over. I read that Iran is now negotiating with Oman. Hey, let's sit down. Let's figure out what we're going to do with this Strait of Hormuz. And Donald Trump doesn't even seem to care about that. There's also reporting that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan have now signed their own joint defense pact. I mean, we have, under the Trump presidency, diminished our standing, diminished our country in ways that I think will go on for a very, very long time. I don't know if that's anything that you can survey or ask people about, but I think it's going to take years and years and years, if indeed at that point we can regain some of the credibility we started with.
No, that's absolutely right. And we actually have asked people, we give them a list of different reasons for their different concerns for the war. And one of them is America's standing in the world. And it was high in the level of concern, not as high as costs and things, which I think makes sense given that everyone, deals with costs at the grocery store, at the pump every day. But people are concerned about, what does this mean for the future of our foreign policy, for our diplomacy, for our relationships with our partners and allies? We are alongside Israel. We're not alongside the countries that I mentioned who negotiated the original Iran deal with us. This has really isolated us as a country from some of our key partners and allies who said they don't want any part in this. They know it's unpopular. They know that this is a war that will be very hard to supposedly win. That they don't want their own countries to have to spend money on another forever war. They've seen the show before. They've watched the United States get involved in foreign wars like this, and it hasn't ended well. So they've taken that lesson. I don't think the Trump administration or Republicans in Congress have taken that lesson. But this is going to have really serious implications for our relationships with partners and allies, and particularly with partners and allies in the region. I think that if we think about who has benefited from this, it's actually our adversaries, China and Russia, who, when they're stacked up against the U.S., they're beginning to look like a more trustworthy and reliable partner.
I know that you have done research into Trump's people who support Trump. How do you divide people up? Like, did you vote for him? Did you not vote for him? Did you like his ideas? How do you when you do those kinds of questions, how do you describe the different categories of people you're asking?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question because we actually segment the population out by the kind of their political partisan ideologies. So we ask people about whether they identify as Democrat, Independent, Republican, and then within the Republican category, we segment out MAGA Republican or non-MAGA Republican. So this is the more traditional Republican who does not identify with the MAGA party. I think it's really helpful for us to segment the population this way because we often see, especially when it comes to the war with Iran, MAGA Republicans are far more likely to agree with Trump and support Trump almost every time. The non-MAGA Republicans and especially independents, we can more often see where they're willing to oppose Trump, especially on cost issues. Some things that I think are worth mentioning is that when we ask people about whether they approve or disapprove of how Trump is handling, for example, gas prices, 75% of Americans disapprove. So that includes some MAGA Republicans, that includes non-MAGA Republicans, independents, in order to get to 75%. So I think it's helpful helpful for us when we kind of segment out, and then we can see where are the divides within the Republican Party. And it's been interesting to see there are divides when it comes to the war with Iran. Even though our overall number for disapproval of the war is 52% opposed, 41% support, when it comes to asking about whether we should spend more money on the war with Iran or whether it's been worth it, we see some people who identify as MAGA Republican and non-MAGA Republican actually oppose spending more money on the war, or thinking that it actually was not worth it, even if they say they approve of the war thus far, or of Trump's decision to start the war. There are elements of it that they're willing to say, I disapprove of. And so I think it's, as a researcher, it's really interesting for us to look at those divides.
I've heard that there are an increasing number of people who call themselves independents. It is especially true of people who don't approve of MAGA or Trump, but they're not really in a headspace where they want to call themselves a Democrat. Do you separate them out? And what have you found about independents?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been one of my favorite research topics to look at. What we have seen is that people are moving more and more into identifying as an independent. We actually have a report coming out next week where more people identify as an independent than identify with a partisan political group. So people are frustrated. They're frustrated with feeling like Democrats don't deliver for them. They're frustrated with feeling like Republicans don't deliver for them. They just want the status quo to change. They feel like our political and economic system is broken, that it's not making their lives meaningfully better. So we hear that frustration, both we see it in our data and we hear it in our focus groups, that people are less likely to identify with a political party. And we see it show up when we say, which party do you trust more on an issue? We see more people move towards neither party. I mean, one fact that I've been really thinking about over the last week related to our talk about Iran is that in the beginning of the year, Trump and the Republican Party had a trust advantage, meaning when we ask, who do you trust more, Democrats or Trump and the Republicans on a certain issue? When we asked about national security and foreign policy, they had a 12-point advantage, meaning people by 12 points trusted them more. Now, after the war with Iran, it's actually shifted so much that Democrats have a 6-point advantage. So an 18-point swing for Democrats to be more trusted. But at the same time, there's a growing chunk in the middle, almost 1 in 4 Americans who say they don't trust either party. So even as Republicans have declined in their approval rating and their trust on these issues, we're not seeing it be a kind of 1-for-1 swing towards Democrats. We are seeing Democrats gain some ground, but more people are just kind of throwing up their hands and saying, I don't think either party is really making my life better. I don't know who to trust.
Do you go into the kind of detail that would tell us why people don't trust either party?
When we ask people in our focus groups, they feel like they haven't delivered. They feel like, that they hear a lot of promises during the campaign season, but then when it comes to actually lowering their costs, actually lowering inflation, making healthcare more affordable, which time and time again are the issues that we hear people care about most, they just don't feel like they're seeing results. So I think that's why when we heard from people who voted for Trump in 2024 is they just wanted their lives to get better. So we're willing to just say, I'm not satisfied with the status quo. I might not agree with much of what Trump says, but he says he's going to lower my costs. So I think it's this general frustration with a feeling like neither party has their best interests in mind, and a feeling that that political parties can be corrupt, that feeling like they have the interests of kind of the elite and the wealthy at top of mind, not the interests of the people that they're supposed to represent. And they feel that frustration more with the Republican Party, but some people certainly tell us they feel it with the Democratic Party as well.
Oh, yeah. The quote unquote, I don't want to vote for a corporate Democrat, a Democrat who takes too much money from companies and doesn't vote with me, it votes with the corporation.
Exactly. And I mean, when we ask about, different things, if elected officials could do to increase trust, we consistently hear, don't take money from corporations. They don't want to feel like their elected representative and corporate PACs. They don't want to feel like their elected representative is bought and paid for. They want to feel like their elected representative is being responsive to their interests. And so that's why I think it's just a huge warning sign for the Republican Party and for Trump to see what we talked about in the beginning, that big gap in focus between what people want their elected officials focused on and what they think they're actually focused on, because They do care about some of the issues that Trump and Republicans are focused on, but it's absolutely not even in their top 5 issues.
Wow. I know that Navigator Research is pretty much everywhere. You can Google Navigator Research. You can go to Facebook, Navigator Research, Blue Sky, navigatorsurvey.bsky.social. Lots of ways to follow this fascinating research. Do you have? Are you doing research right now that's going to drop soon?
We are. Yeah, navigatorresearch.org is our site and links to all of our social media. There's actually, we are now thinking through just something to, if people want to follow along, we're looking at media consumption. So we just did a big report. Where do people get their news? We know it's WCPT, but we know there's other sources as well. So we're trying to get a better understanding of, where do people get their news and information, especially as we see the rise of social media. So media consumption is one piece we're looking at. And then we've also heard from farmers who say the Iran war is affecting them. It's raising their prices. Yes. They're frustrated. So we are really eager and working on a research project to hear from farmers and hear how have tariffs, the lack of access to markets in China, the Iran war raising the cost of fertilizer and fuel, how is that impacting them, and has it changed their views on these issues?
Melissa Toufanian from Navigator Research, thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's really fascinating, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me on and for a great conversation.
We are going to take a break for news. We're going to be back with more after this.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Alexa, play WCPT.